latest edition of Surgeons' Lives. I'm your host, John Monson. Today's guest is probably one of the most famous surgeons in the world, and he has been that way for some time now. Steve Wexner is a story of the American dream, coming from immigrant family in the 19th century, growing up in Brooklyn and the 5 boroughs of New York and Long Island. He's followed a passionate and dedicated career in surgery from the very outset, despite being born into a family of lawyers, judges, and politicians. There is really nothing Steve has not achieved in the field of colorectal surgery. He's been in leadership positions in multiple societies. He's been a researcher, an educator, a mentor, and is currently an editor-in-chief. He's been in the Cleveland Clinic in Florida for some decades now, and frankly, shows no signs of slowing down. He retains all the passions he ever had from the very outset. So without further ado, let's go over and talk to Steve about his life and career. I'm John Monson, and this is Surgeons' Lives. This is called Surgeons' Lives, but it has the subtitle of Stuff That Matters, because although, of course, we'll spend a little bit of time, as I do with most of the guests, talking about their career journey, etc., as much as anything else, I'm interested in what else presses their buttons and makes their heart race, etc., etc., and it varies from person to person. But what I like to do is to ask, for everybody's benefit, for the person just to start with a little brief summary of their life story, starting with the words, "I was born in."
I don't have to state the year, do I?
No, actually, you're the second person that thought that's what I was asking. That shows paranoia, actually. Everybody else says, no, I was born in Brooklyn or whatever, which is actually what I meant.
I was born in Brooklyn, so
there you go.
All right. So, all right. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, to a family of attorneys, ultimately politicians. My great-grandparents having emigrated from Kiev and Minsk on the maternal side, and on the paternal, sorry, let me say that over again. So I got it backwards. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, to a family of attorneys, ultimately politicians, who were born in the U.S., as were their parents, but ultimately my great-grandparents had come from Kiev and Minsk on my maternal side, and on the paternal side from Krakow, which, interestingly enough, I subsequently discovered on the tombstones of my great-grandparents was part of Austria when they were born there in the 1860s, and when they emigrated to the U.S. In 1883, it was part of Austria. So I did manage to trace lineage a bit back beyond Brooklyn. And like many people who were born in Brooklyn, ended up in Long Island, where I went to high school, and then migrated back to the 5 boroughs to Manhattan for undergraduate at Columbia, save for a self-created exchange program at University College London, and went back to New York, finished up, stayed in Manhattan for medical school at Cornell, stayed in Manhattan for general surgery residency at the Roosevelt Hospital, which subsequently became St. Luke's Roosevelt.
Yep.
And through multiple other metamorphoses, and now is Mount Sinai West. When I was there as part of Columbia University. So those are the roots, but I'll stop and let you ask.
So as you say, you were your dad was a judge, I think, yeah, a lawyer and a judge, or
yeah. My dad was an attorney, and interesting enough, he went to. He started at Brooklyn College, and when he ended up in Korea, in the forces, developed frostbite in his toes. He was stationed in Incheon, which is now where the international airport is. It used to be an army base, and was told when he got to New York he might well have an amputation if he stayed in cold weather. So he had a friend who was at the University of Miami. And oddly enough, he went to the University of Miami and did college and law school in something like 5 years combined, and then went back to Brooklyn. He ultimately, yes, did become the supervising judge of the Supreme Court for Long Island, Nassau, and Suffolk counties. And his dad, my paternal grandfather, also he went to law school in New York, and he became Governor Nelson Rockefeller's Undersecretary of Labor for New York State before he passed away in 1969, so it would have been in the mid 60s and so on. And my sister's an attorney, although she's doesn't practice. She's a consultant. She's in entertainment law. Used to work for Viacom and then subsequently BBC and some others.
Right.
So I'm the black sheep, clearly.
Yeah, I was just going to say you're the odd man out. So what was the trigger for medicine?
You know, it's interesting. I suspect it's two separate events. Number one, when I was, I don't know, 4 or 5 years old, my paternal grandmother, in retrospect, suffered what was a myocardial infarction and died. And it was in a small, what was called a bungalow in the Catskills in New York in the Adirondacks. And it's just a small place. And I guess I must have known what was going on. And within about a year, my newborn sister ended up with a very high fever, from memory, 103, 104, something, in an emergency room. And I think those two exposures are the only things I can think of that made me say, you know, I want to go into medicine, and kind of stuck with it, except for, like most people my age in the 1960s, you know, a brief stint of wanting to be an astronaut till my thoughts came back down to earth. But that was, I think, fairly ubiquitous during the space race.
Yeah, I'm not sure also you're the right size for an astronaut. I think they have space constraints.
I hadn't even gotten that far. Not to mention my vision as well.
That's true.
The coordination, we didn't even get there.
So, and at some point in medical school, you know, I don't know whether you had the opportunity to listen to Robbie's interview, but you know, he told me the story of his. You know, he took some time before he became convinced that he wanted to do surgery. In fact, he took some time before he was convinced he wanted to do medicine. He took a year off in the middle of his residency to go find himself. But you know, when did you jump onto the surgery thing? And you know, was it early? Did you always know, or were you a late bloomer like Robbie?
No, mine was well before even high school. You know, as a young kid, it just, for whatever the reason, it seemed to appeal to me. Maybe because the failure of medical therapy from the paramedics and whatever happened in the emergency room, maybe, who knows. But the idea that you could do some kind of an intervention, I suppose, I don't really have a recollection of an epiphany at any given moment in time, nor a specific cogent rationale. I just remember, as far back as I can think, wanting to be a surgeon.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just I wanted to be a doctor, I wanted to be a surgeon. Now, colorectal, that didn't enter into the picture till I was already at Roosevelt Hospital, but certainly surgeon did.
And did you have a plan at that point? I mean, you have a reputation. I can say this sort of thing to you because I've known you for a few years, but you do have a reputation of knowing where you're going. Did you have a plan for, you know, you went into St. Luke's or Roosevelt as it was. What was the plan at that time? What was the ambition? Was there an ambition?
Well, yeah. I mean, it did change within surgery what I wanted a couple of times. So, you know, but way before there. So when I was in high school, before I even ever had a driving license, I was doing work at Queens Hospital Center, which undoubtedly now has another name. And I was doing research there in high school as a volunteer, you know, just getting my feet wet with things. And when I went to Columbia, I although I was pre-med, I was an English major quite deliberately because I thought that it'd be a very good idea to learn how to write and to hone those particular skills. Also, part of why I did an exchange in the UK to further pursue, literature and English language. So that was part of the plan, was academic, as opposed to, it never crossed my mind to do private practice. I was thought somehow academic and therefore the English language, English major. And the idea of getting involved. So I did volunteer work in high school at Queens Hospital. I, throughout college, was doing volunteer work up at Albert Einstein Medical College. Used to take the subway up to the Bronx and was doing volunteer work there. And then I also, even before I started medical school, I finished college a semester early because of high school AP credits and credits from London and whatnot. And somehow I finished early. And I spent 6 or 8 months, I don't remember the exact time, at what was then called Sidney Farber Cancer Center, doing research there too. So, I mean, it was interspersed throughout my career. So when I was in medical school, the key research there at the time, Tom Shires was the chair of surgery at Cornell. And so, shock trauma was really what was big. And obviously, that's kind of what I looked at, but I wanted a more clinically oriented program, and that's why I thought Roosevelt would be a great choice going across town, because at that time Cornell was, it may be very well different now under Fabrizio's leadership, but at that time there wasn't the same clinical emphasis, particularly for the residents, that there was at some of the other hospitals. This is all pre-Libby Zion and changes like that. New York, everything's different now, but to me, it attracted me.
No, you later in life, your great mentor was sadly missed, David Jagelman. But in early life, did you have were there mentors that really became role models for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why I picked colorectal. Even as an intern, I was keenly interested to continue research. And Roosevelt was definitely clinical. It was absolutely not the least bit academic. And for those people who are viewing and listening, there's no epic. It's not electronic. These are handwritten records, and you'd have to go to the bowels of the hospital and thumb through charts to try and find things. But I was interested in pursuing research, and there were 2 colorectal surgeons, Tom Daly and Rick Brabe, both of whom retired, but they were great mentors. They saw, you want to get interested, you get interested. And that's why I think so many of their general surgery residents went into colorectal, people like Lester Gottesman and Elliot Prager, and just a host of people who ended up going into colorectal surgery. Thinking Bob Gardine, Howard Hardy. I mean, a lot of people. There were 3 chiefs a year, and I'd say at least one every year went into colorectal because of their mentorship. I was probably, of the group, the most engaged in the academic aspect. So Rick Brabe and Tom Daly had me submit papers every year to the New York Society of Colorectal Surgeons. And I used to go present at those meetings, and I got to meet a lot of people from North Shore, from Long Island Jewish, from the downtown hospitals that aren't even there anymore, from Beth Israel, from Columbia, coming in from New Jersey and such. And I met a lot of people. And the thing that struck me about colorectal is that people were really nice, really warm and welcoming. And I networked with people who were far my senior, who just really treated me very nicely. And I thought, this is a good group of people. I spend my career with these people. Besides, what you do as a colorectal surgeon, all the usual stuff, why somebody likes the field of surgery, the people in it, I thought, were also really, really nice, warm people. And that certainly helped, solidify the decision where to go. So Rick Brabe, who was an alumnus of Stan Goldberg, Tom trained at the Leahy, but Rick was a bit of a Stan, and he was asked to give some talks at Stanley's annual course, and said to me, would you like to get these talks organized for me. Now, remember, in those days, making slides wasn't PowerPoint. It was,
Sure, I remember.
as you remember, you had to,
Mm.
put the little letters on a paper and then
Yeah.
use PXMAT film and go to the darkroom and develop. But I helped him with his talks. And in exchange, he took me out to program to watch him give the lectures for several years in a row. And that certainly helped, in the decision. So it's, yes, good mentorship.
And is that
Then
what triggered your decision to go to Minnesota or Minneapolis, or was Minneapolis just one of your top three or whatever? I mean, or
my choices at the end of the day, I was fortunate enough I think 1982, could have been 83, to have met Bill Heald at Stan's course and sat with him and spoke. And he said, "Why don't you come over and visit me in Basingstoke?" And little did he know I'd take him up on the offer, because as somebody who is a fanatical traveler and an avid Anglophile, it's like, you didn't have to ask twice. So so Bill became a mentor, and I used to stay at his home frequently, and subsequently my kids stayed in their home and in his home, and Bill and Bounce's house in Basingstoke, and so on in Odium, actually. And so he became a mentor too, because I used to go whenever I could go and spend some time in the operating room and theater, as it were, with him. So my dilemma was, he wanted me to be his senior registrar, and he had a position for me in the Basingstoke District Hospital. And I was deciding to apply in the match or not. And, and I remember getting some advice from, Stan Goldberg, not where to go but get your U.S. colorectal training done first. Then you can always go do something else. So that was my choice, was go to UK or stay in US. So within US, that was my top choice. I mean, if nothing else, I'd been there multiple times and knew the people, and it was a great program. So, and Bill likes to tell that story in a lot of speeches when I introduce him, that I was supposed to have been at his SR and never was. So.
And you joined, of course, a fairly legendary fellowship year. I've already interviewed one. I'm due to interview another, and sadly we cannot interview the final member of the year. Interesting group of fellows that year. That would be my description. And well, that's your cue to tell me your description of the group, as you saw, because as I say, all fascinating and wonderfully colorful individuals, but different.
Yeah. Oh, no, it's a great group of people. I mean, everyone went in a somewhat different direction. I mean, obviously, Robbie went in the direction of DCR and being editor-in-chief, and Larry Whalen did a great job in the early days of laparoscopy with some of the best basic science bench research that any colorectal surgeon did, way before most other colorectal surgeons were going into any kind of basic research. In fact, just to put it in context, when we were a fellowship class, which was 87, 88, if memory serves correct, there were no full-time university colorectal surgeons, period. I mean, the program was called University of Minnesota, but it was a private practice out of Abbott Northwestern and Paul Ramsey and a variety of other hospitals around the area. And although we went to the university, it was just to do colonoscopies on a periodic basis with Sandy Navatvangs, who subsequently went to Mayo. So there was none. Now, here we are, 35, 36 years later, I don't think you could find a university department of surgery that doesn't have a colorectal surgeon. So you have to put it in context for where we were. So the fact that Larry did what he did, going back to New York, and he was first at my alma mater. He trained for General Columbia. I was at Roosevelt, which was a Columbia hospital. He was at Columbia, the main hospital, Presbyterian, and he went back to my alma mater to Roosevelt, and then changed to Columbia, and I think now he's at Lenox Hill. But he did great work. Tony Vernava stayed where he trained at St. Louis University, and then I had the chance to, and actually, ironically enough, Rick Brabe, who'd been my mentor in Roosevelt, went to St. Louis University and became Tony's mentor for a while, which was kind of an interesting passed one off to the other. And I had the chance to recruit Tony. So in my 12-year stint as chief of staff at Cleveland Clinic, Florida, from 97 to 2008, somewhere around 98, we started working on the Cleveland Clinic Naples campus. And I was able to recruit Tony from St. Louis University to come and lead our colorectal department, our education and research areas, in fact, surgery over in Naples. And unfortunately, in 2006, the Cleveland Clinic gave up the Naples campus. But anyway, so I got a chance to work with Tony again quite closely for at least probably 7-8 years when he was in Florida.
So you, as you say, the 3 or 4 musketeers had, went in different directions in their careers, all very successful, etc., and all, highly productive, etc. You've been characterized by, very strong leadership skills and progression and success, etc. I had the privilege of being at the course last year that was put on in San Diego about leadership and one thing or another, and had to debate Jim Fleshman, the old-fashioned conversation about his leadership, nature or nurture. Where do you sit on that? I mean, you've been spectacularly successful in terms of your leadership achievements, but do you think it was genetic, or did you teach yourself? I mean, you obviously learn as you go along, but where do you sit on that debate?
Well, I think that certain people have leadership skills, and that comes out from an early age. Certain people end up deciding what they're going to do with their friends, or they become the student council president, or they end up being the one to edit the yearbook, or whatever it happens to be. I mean, people somehow evolve into a leadership role without being anointed into it, because they're all sort of just the group decides how it goes. And some people like it, and some people may have those skills, they don't want to use them. But I think it's a combination of having them and enjoying being able to accomplish something by collaborating with people. So, I think it's more of collaboration and leadership, because good leadership should be getting people to do things that you want done because they want them done, not because they think you want them done, but collaborating and getting people to a common good is, I think, the best way to lead is getting everybody engaged. Everyone understands where they're going, but they'll agree, or maybe not all, but most people agree. And so I think it's to some degree innate, but then, as you say, you definitely keep learning. There are facets in leadership that weren't formalized. They always existed, but they weren't formalized the way they are now. And I can tell you things. For example, my much better half, Mariana Berhu, who's our chief of staff and board of governors and so on here at Cleveland Clinic, spent over 2 years getting a master's degree in conflict resolution. Now, you and I were in school. Conflict may have been verbal, it may have been physical, and resolution was getting called into somebody's office, perhaps, but it's not the way it's done now. And so this is an evolving field that we all have to know. The way you speak to people, the expectations of people, for example, as generations change, so too do priorities, and we have to be respectful of that. So part of leadership also is recognizing that the way we did things or do things may not work for other people, and so we've got to be respectful of that. So there's a lot of learning involved, obviously.
Do you think, if I flipped it around the other way, do you think you would be happy being the third spear carrier in the left? You know, a member of the chorus?
I mean, it depends where you are, because people do shift chairs. You can't lead everything because there's just not enough time in the day. So, you know, in certain, I mean, take for example, publishing. I mean, okay, I'm an editor in chief, but for other journals, I'm an editorial board member. That's fine. You
Sure.
can't lead everything, and I think that's reasonable. And you kind of pick where you're going to lead. I have no desire, for example, to be CEO where I work. I had an acting CEO role for some time, circa in 2000. I don't remember exactly. And I got a taste of it. It's not what I want to do. I like the clinical care. So clinical academic leadership, sure, but corporate leadership. So I'm happy to have a seat at the table in that regard. And I think, you know, if you try and lead everything, my suspicion is you may not lead anything well. I think you got to kind of pick what
Yeah.
you're going to lead and what you're going to participate.
Now we agreed not to mention this in terms of numbers, but you're of an age that people like people like you and me are beginning to think about the R word and how you would approach it. And I've asked this of numerous people, and of course the responses are very variable, et cetera. But where are you? Where do you stand? What's your view about retirement as a surgeon? You to quote a reasonably topical thing, somebody might say you're in your prime. Others might say not so much. Where do you sit on that? What's your thinking?
Yeah, hang on. My computer's just done something very awkward and I can't see you. So,
Yeah, it probably has a natural filter.
you know, it's this new upgrade they put in. Okay, we're good. I think I need to move the mouse periodically. So I think, you know, retirement is something very individual for different people. A lot of people in what you and I do of colorectal surgery, they sort of drift into anorectal surgery and colonoscopy,
Yeah.
and then they, you know, go part-time and retire, whatever. But there are a few people who persist, and Vic Fazio was certainly one of them. And for me, the R word is redo, because more and more of what I do is redo pelvic surgery, and the complexity and the volume is, as you say, the prime of my career. I do more volume and more complex than I've done in the 35 years at Cleveland Clinic, Florida. It just keeps increasing, and I thrive on it. I love it. I think it's great teaching the residents, taking care of the patients, you know, doing the research. So on a personal level, my shall we say, role models are Bill Heald, who still runs around the world teaching, Angelita Habrigama, who still runs around the world teaching, George Bursey, who's just about 103 out of Cedar Sinai. You know, and you know, there are a host of people like that who stay very, very active. And to me, that's what I'd like to do, is keep going as long as reasonable.
You're not going anywhere soon. So
Right.
Jeff Matthews said to me that, and I quote two people. Jeff Matthews said to me that he thinks there's something to be said for surgeons beyond a certain age, whatever that age might be,
Right.
probably somewhere in the 60s, voluntarily doing psychomotor cognitive testing with not punitively, et cetera, so that they at least have insight. Barry Solke said to me that as he was, you know, around that age, he made sure he had a friend and a colleague who was, you know, tasked with saying to him, should it ever happen, you know, hey, I think it's time, in terms of the operating skills. the legend, of Michael DeBakey operating into his 90s. I mean, my personal view is I don't think that's a good thing.
No.
But what do you think about, do you think we should make surgeons retire at an age? I know it sounds very socialistic or communistic, but, do you want to be operated on by an 84-year-old? What do you
No,
think?
I think there probably is a limit, but I think just as the entire life expectancy has increased, and everyone talks about, 60 is the new 50 and so on, I think that limit has gone up. So when I was hired at the Cleveland Clinic, many practices throughout the country had a mandatory age 65 years retirement. That's gone away. That might move up to 75 perhaps, but I don't think it's 85. So I think there's, I think it's gone up, but it's not become infinite. And I think there is a point there where you probably should, before something happens, say, okay, I'm going to step aside. I just think that it's probably approximately 10 years more than it was 35 years ago when it was 65, and it's probably more likely 75. People are taking better care of themselves. I think doing laparoscopic or robotic surgery is arguably easier than big abdominal incisions. Plus, now we very carefully monitor we continuously audit our results, and not just us, externally, third-party payers, public databases, which wasn't done with that same level of detail and scrutiny. So if things change, we'll know it. And people talk about a learning curve. You start out in practice, there's a lot of problems early on when you're operated by somebody who's 35 years old, who's just getting going, and they haven't had these experiences and they're working through them. And there undoubtedly is at the other end of the spectrum too. But both of those things are tracked, and I think that's a good thing.
What about the other side, namely the leadership side? So, you've been a chief of something in the Cleveland Clinic for a couple of decades, until you step aside. There is, what I'm getting at is, at what point do we give someone else a chance? If let's say you keep going until you're, I don't know, 75, for example, or maybe even, what do you think about that issue? Do you think chairs should, have a finite tenure, 15 years, whatever it might be, simply to create the new generational cycle?
Well, I think there's number one, I think it is important to always make opportunities for people. And with the exception of department chair, every other job I've had, I've moved aside for somebody else. For example, I used to chair research and education, and Rick Weiss now does that. I used to be the director of research for the department, and Giovanna De Silva does that. And I used to be head of the physiology lab when I first started. Dana Sands does that, and so on and so forth. So moving over and transitioning to other people is important, as is succession planning. And succession planning certainly will be done. I think it's important. I also think it's important not to just abruptly step aside and have a vacuum. So I think getting people up to speed is appropriate. Now, at the Cleveland Clinic, we have two processes to ensure that a leader is still effectively leading. And basically, every year you go through a review by the Board of Governors.
Right.
Every member of staff, from the most junior person to the CEO, goes through an annual peer review process where your performance is measured, your academic performance, your clinical performance, so on and so forth. And comments are solicited about how you're doing. That's annual. Every 5 years, every chair, and I just completed mine, it goes through essentially a 360 where everybody reporting to you is asked about your leadership and how you're doing, and are you bringing fresh ideas, and are you effective, and so on. And if, thankfully for me, I was reappointed based on all of what's been done, as well as what people think. So you could probably accomplish a lot, but if you're not effective at it, and putting the Cleveland Clinic aside, I think in any organization, if you accomplish a lot, but people aren't happy, that organization should look at, okay, well, maybe this is a lot more could be accomplished if people were happy and engaged and supportive, right? And on the other hand, if people are happy, engaged, and supportive, but you're not accomplishing anything, you're just a good guy and you're everybody's friend, that's not helpful either. So I think we have a phenomenal process. It's been in place here for what, 105 years or something or other now, the way these reviews are done. And so we seem to, be on, I'm very pleased. I've been
Get it right most of the time, as you say.
Yeah.
So
Right.
you when you go home, just to pivot a little bit, your background, as in your physical background, is a little different to my physical background. And that just shows that I'm a long-standing failure, etc.
Looks like you're successful at racing cars.
Yeah, well, yeah. Somebody, I was describing my failure or my lack of talent racing a car once to a guy who was a professional race driver, and he said, "Let me tell you something." He said, "You're a better race driver than I am a surgeon." So I said, that may well be true. I would accept that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But so outside of work, what does Steve Wexner do or like to do, or are you just a sad and lonely workaholic?
No, definitely not sad. I'm definitely far from sad. I mean, I'm energized by what I do at work every day. So that sad is definitely not in the vernacular. And nor is lonely. And
No,
that's
exactly. Yeah.
that's what I certainly like to do. And it meshes very well because I love to travel. And so both of my sons are in New York and have been for many years. And I go up there very frequently and spend time in New York and spend time with them. And we travel together as well, particularly the younger one who loves traveling. He's got my bug, as does Mariana's daughter, who's also in New York most of the time. And so we can parlay, if maybe there's a meeting and we tack on a lot of extra time or some extra time. Maybe there's no meeting, we just go away. But I would say to travel with family is clearly at the
that's your big thing.
Yeah, that's my priority. I mean, I really enjoy exploring the world, and so much the better if I've got one or both of my kids or or her daughter with us. It's great fun.
You're not you don't do the traditional things, a good walk ruined, as golf was described, or things like that. I mean,
Well, I try to take care of myself. I like cycling, although very careful where to do it down here in Florida. But I like cycling. I work with a trainer. I do all of those things, just to keep physically active and physically fit. Try and train a lot of cardio. Definitely, love different restaurants around the world and eating different kinds of food. So my older son had gone to boarding school for golf, David Ledbetter Golf Academy. And I used to bring him around the country to tournaments, but I didn't really play. I mean, I sort of picked up clubs and hacked around, but for my birthday 15 months ago, more or less, both the kids got me golf lessons, right? So I've now been taking golf lessons, and I must say the best part of golf is that every time they come to Florida, we play golf together. So I'm not terribly good, but it doesn't matter. It's a great excuse to go out and spend any number of hours with them outdoors, in golf. So I wouldn't call myself an avid golfer, but I'm enjoying it as an
You're not in the
to be more time with them. Not like Barry Salke, no.
No, or David Ratner or people like
Right,
that.
or David Ratner. And I've played golf. Well, Wesley, my older son, has played golf with both of them and Gary Gesselter and others. And I used to tag along and whack the ball into the water or into somebody's house. But I now at least know how to hit it straight.
So have you counted up the number of countries? No. And do you have a bucket list of countries that you're missing?
Not really. I mean, I'm fortunate in that I'm getting to go to pretty much any place that sounds interesting at some point in time. And I've got a trip coming up next week to Azerbaijan that I've been to, and I've got, I know there's for what you like, there's a Formula One there, right? There's a Grand Prix in
last
Baku,
week, yeah.
Baku, and well, I think it's in Miami as well.
Yeah, no, it was Baku was
weekend.
last weekend and Miami's this weekend.
Right. So Baku and ESCP this year is in Vilnius that I've not visited. So, eventually you do get around to the different places. And that's often what I'll do is I go somewhere and for business, it's great. Okay, put that on the list to go back just for fun and pleasure. And that's more or less what I end up doing. But I don't have a specific list of places like, I've not been, would like to go. Some I think would be interesting, but probably off limits now. Iran and Iraq are supposed to have great artifacts and wonderful history, but I don't think in the near future be going to either one, but they're interesting. And if situation changes.
Yeah, I was in I was in Baghdad the day that Ayatollah Khomeini died in Iran, and there were quite a lot of celebrations, obviously, in the streets of Baghdad, and several hundred people died from the falling bullets, etc. And we were staying in the Al Rashid Hotel, which was the only rocket-proof hotel in Baghdad. This was courtesy of the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland that ran one of the hospitals there before the first war, etc. So it's an interesting experience. You're quite right. So a few interviewee type questions. So if you had the opportunity to using what you know now as a mature Steve Wexner in his prime to the 25-year-old Steve Wexner, what would you say to do differently, or would you?
I'm not sure I'd do a lot different, but I might try, and we were talking about it earlier, leadership and just having a seat at the table. And I might try and have a more active seat just to be a little bit more diffuse, because as you develop your career, you tend to focus more and more, for me, ASCRS, ACS, SAGES, American Board of Colorectal Surgery. But there are other groups where you could potentially, both really enjoy and derive personal benefit from being engaged. But again, it's a matter of not spreading yourself too thin. But short of that, I don't think there's a whole lot.
I presume answers the next question, which you don't sound like somebody who has any significant regrets.
No, absolutely no. I'm very happy with where I am, or I wouldn't still be here 35 years later. Maybe I'm at the halfway point, 35 more years, but I don't think so. It'd be nice, but I don't think so.
I asked Robbie when he was sending me, he said, "What pictures do you want?" I said, whatever you choose, but if it would be possible, would there be a picture of Robbie Madoff with hair? And it turned out to be impossible.
Well, I do have, but they're not for public consumption. They're from the days undergraduate at Columbia. And,
that would be fine. Then that's a definite requirement.
Yeah. It cost you more than you could afford.
So how would you like to be remembered, and how do you think you will be remembered?
Well, I think being a mentor, another word that we were talking about how you acquire leadership skills over the years, and there are different expressions that are now used: sponsor and ally. weren't used until much more recently in my career. And I think that's important. For example, not because of any conscious reason whatsoever, but I've trained huge number of women in colorectal surgery and mentored and sponsored many others around the world. And now suddenly that's fashionable to use those terms. It's just something I've always done. I just have always found people energetic, eager, enthusiastic to be mentored, to be supported, to be their ally. It's easy, right? And so there's a host of people who want to do that, men and women, all over the world. And I think to me, that's the most important thing, because it's a bit like teaching somebody. If you give somebody a fish, they have a meal. You teach them to fish, they have a meal for life. So it's the same with surgeons, right? If you take care of your own patients, you've done fine, presumably, for your patients. If you've taught somebody else to operate and you've taught somebody to research and question and teach, you're helping that many more people around the world. And it's a legacy, and it's, it's not tangible.
No, very significantly.
Right. And so me, to be remembered as a mentor, an ally, a sponsor is very important, more so than as a leader, but that I've influenced people's lives.
So you raised that point. So the second part of the question was, how do you think you will be remembered? Do you think you will be remembered as the mentor or the leader? Presumably both,
Yeah, possibly both, but to me, it's very gratifying. People, many times, I don't realize the impact I've had on them by working with them remotely, because as you and I are both engaged in social media and in video experiences like this and in collaborative research, and and you're also very well traveled internationally, so you interface with people and it doesn't really register with you or me necessarily the same as the mentee, the sponsee, the person to whom you've been an ally. And hearing how grateful they are, I think that is more so being remembered that than as a leader. You don't realize the impact you have on these people. And I think it's wonderful.
All right, I'm going to finish with some quickie questions. You're familiar with this concept. It's sort of the 60-second thing. You get to answer a series of questions. There are no right or wrong answers, although clearly I do know the correct answer to these. And you will only be partially judged on your answers. Are you ready to go?
Sure.
Okay. Baseball or football?
Neither.
Coke or Pepsi?
Neither.
Mac or PC?
PC.
Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Beach or mountains?
City.
Beatles or Stones?
Marginally Beatles.
Home or away?
That's a tough one. I mean, home. Love traveling, but it's always great coming home, particularly when home is in South Florida. Hence
All right,
the
Steve.
cities. Hence the cities. That's, for me, I live very deliberately in a quiet, peaceful place in a tourist resort area like you. And I love going to London and Athens and Tokyo and all these walking, Buenos Aires, walk, cities, walk, and then come home to the peace and quiet.
Yeah. It's a pretty good balance, isn't it?
Yep. Very fortunate.
Yeah. Well, Steve, I want to thank you for taking the time to chat today. And appreciate we've known each other for 30 years or so, and it's been fascinating to watch your skills. I've learned a lot from you over the years, probably not nearly enough as I should have, but I'll take what I can. And thanks very much, and hopefully you'll see this coming out fairly soon.
You're very kind. Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure to see you and to be with you. And I guess I'll see you soon in Seattle.